Welcome to the Mystic-Skeptic radio show and podcast. I'm your host, David. And in this week's show, our guest is Robert Harrington. He is a political analyst who has written more than 300 articles for the news outlet, The Palmer Report. He developed the website forthrightleft.com to express his opinions, uncensored from other media outlets. He's currently living in south of England. And to start off, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David.
And so, Robert, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in politics.
Oh, so just a small correction. That's old news. The 300 articles, it's now over 600 articles that I've archived with Palmer Report. I have never considered myself a political writer until fairly recently, specifically the last couple of years. I wouldn't even have necessarily have called myself a particularly political. I had done some writing, but never political writing, and political writing was arguably my least favorite kind of writing, really. But like so many people, I think I was galvanized by the candidacy and presidency of Donald Trump. And as time progressed, I became more and more outraged by what was being done in the name of political expediency to the land of my birth. And Bill Palmer, who runs Palmer Report, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Palmer Report, are you not?
Tell us a little bit about him and his project.
Yeah. He put out a call for writers, and I remember reading it and kind of shrugging, and then I kind of put it in the back of my mind. I thought, well, maybe I'll give it a shot. What the heck, you know? And so at some point I made the decision to submit 3 articles, which was what you had to do in order to qualify. And I thought, you know, I'll write whatever, send it off to him. And if he picks me up, great. If he doesn't, great. I didn't really expect him. I expected thousands of applications and I expected to get overlooked, but hey, he picked me and another gal. And I think he's added, on all told, about 12 writers to his staff, of which I'm a contributing editor. And I've been writing for Bill Palmer now for over 2 years. And I find the world of politics fascinating. I study it every day. And of course, the calamitous presidency of Donald Trump is a never-ending source of daily articles. We have such an embarrassment of riches with this man that it's difficult to determine on a daily basis what to write. I mean, you know, we get 6 outrages before breakfast with this guy. This guy is just a complete and utter failure as a human being, as a president. He's a despicable human being, he's an unending source of outrage for me. I believe that Trump effectively stole the election. Now, that's a very loaded term, and I'm aware of that. We can go into that further if you like. My position on how he became elected president of the United States, but you know, that's essentially it. I'm a portrait artist. Really didn't have that much to do with politics, and now all of a sudden I'm embroiled in politics in a very deep way. So, and I'm looking at that writing, really political writing, as a second career now. That's how things have developed for me, completely unexpected, truly. And like so many people, I wouldn't be involved in politics at all in any capacity were it not for Donald Trump. So, you know, not that I'm trying to give him any credit or anything, but because I find him odious, I don't want to give him credit for anything, but you know, that's essentially it. But I came to England as a consequence of the fact that my wife is English. We met online, as a matter of fact. And I moved to England in 2003, and much to recommend here, but you know, that's essentially it. That's a brief encapsulation of the story of my life thus far.
So Artie, feel free to jump in with questions. But what I wanted, before we started the conversation, the broadcast, you mentioned that you stay in touch with American media as a way of finding out
Yes.
what's happening. Do you trust American media? Because I keep being disappointed by the major outlets and even independent media on our radio station. We play Democracy Now! And Tom Hartman. Sometimes they kind of go off the rails with agendas that are not using the only system that you should be using when doing journalism, and that's almost like a scientific method of discovering information. Um, what do you think about the state of the media and the kind of information that people are being fed?
That's a tough question to answer easily, because on the one hand, you have a scenario where you've got the fox effectively guarding the hen house. One of the 4 or 5 different factors that made it possible for Donald Trump to become president of the United States was the inordinate attention, unjustified, unmerited attention he got from the media. And the media were overly complicit with Trump in his excoriation of Hillary Clinton and the so-called email non-traversy, I like to call it. So there's that. On the other hand, I don't perceive, a worldwide conspiracy. I don't perceive that the media are joined at the hip or joined together to pursue a specific agenda. I think the media, and I'm talking the print media, the television and social media and everything like that, the official organs of social media that are outlets for the print media, are essentially men and women who are trying to do a good job, who have a level of integrity, and I have a certain amount of respect for that level of integrity. Individually, yes, sometimes they will cross the line, and certainly there are entire organizations that cross the line. And for a long time, Fox News was nothing but a shill for Donald Trump. So, there's that to contend with. But on balance, I would say that that it's useful, it's trustworthy. You can generally rely on mostly truth coming from them. And you mentioned science, the scientific method. Well, just like science, the news media is self-correcting, and they will. And by the way, this is something that Donald Trump actually uses against them, because Trump has a standing policy of never admitting mistake. So when he sees a news outlet retracting a story, that particularly one that was unflattering to Trump, he will actually use that against them. He will he perceives that as a weakness. He perceives honesty as a weakness. He perceives the confession of a mistake, as even when they're coming out and saying, we regret the error. He perceives all of that as a confession. It's a confession of weakness, and I perceive his perception as an actual weakness, because to me, I'm a big believer in science, and one of the crowning achievements of science is its capacity to recognize that it's headed down a wrong path, to back up and change direction when it perceives that it's going down a wrong path. And in other words, it's anti-religion in the sense that it doesn't function on dogma. It functions on truth. It is guided ultimately by truth. And I think, by and large, the media is or are guided by truth. So yes, short answer is yes, I do trust the media to an extent, but I like to cross-check things. But it's interesting that I don't think it's really possible to sustain deep lies over time without it coming back on you. And I think people in the media realize this, and that's why they largely pursue the truth. Yes, they pursue ratings as well, and that is a conflict of interest, an admitted conflict of interest. And I think deep down in the darkest regions of the hearts of many people in the media, they're hoping that Donald Trump gets reelected because he's an endless source of news. I'm not among them, but I understand the impulse. But on balance, yes, I do trust the media. I hope I've answered the question. But it's a complicated question that requires a complicated answer, so I apologize for that.
The real question is the interest. Like, if you have corporations and you have politicians, you have people who own these media outlets, it's really easy for them to manipulate what information comes out. And we saw that with stories about Trump being killed before the election. So there's too many powerful forces that don't allow important information to come out at the right time.
Well, I do know that there are some organizations that do practice catch and kill, but they're generally the more disreputable ones, like the National Enquirer. In fact, my understanding was that that was the catch and kill arrangement that Trump had with the National Enquirer. They'd get a juicy story on him, like with Stormy Daniels, for example, and then they bottle it up. But as far, I mean, it's kind of it's an awfully subjective thing to say that the news is not reporting enough on a certain direction. I mean, yeah, they're going to make mistakes about what direction they take their stories and whether or not they pursue a story enough. And there's always room for 20/20 hindsight. As we know, every time government makes a mistake, a terrorist slips through the cracks, or child services fails to recognize a bad parent, and the parent kills the kid. And there's all kinds of recriminations, backward glance recriminations come their way. And some of it is certainly justifiable. But I also see, I see a lot of integrity. I see integrity in the New York Times. I see integrity in CNN, in the Washington Post. Could they do better? Of course they could. Who couldn't? But when you compare them with Fox News or even the White House, which is just I mean, every time there's an announcement from the White House, it's virtually a lie. My problem with the news is not so much that they are complicit in lying to us in a kind of a deep state conspiracy sort of sense of the idea. My problem with the news is that they will tend to be a little bit spineless when it comes to complete nonsense. And we saw a lot of that in the 2016 election. We saw them carrying a lot of water for Donald Trump when it came to the email so-called controversy, of which everybody I think understands now was a woman who took her work home with her, and some of it was ill-advised to be using it on an unsecure system at home. But no security was breached and no harm, no foul was committed. And they actually made a jailable offense out of something that was really would have drawn a minor reprimand in a real life situation. I mean, it was beyond absurd. And then they permitted Benghazi to be taken to extremes that were also absurd. And they permitted a lot of the witch huntery on Hillary Clinton, in my opinion. And then, of course, there's the Comey letter, which may have been the final nail in Hillary Clinton's presidential ambition coffin. So, which the news media also carried as a big dark story, which was, again, another controversy. So, yeah, well, of course they have our things. Yes, they are. But Do I see them as this bête noire, this evil monster that is out of control and does nothing but lies? No, I think that's going too far in the other direction, and just in my opinion.
But nobody's talking about an evil monster or a deep state conspiracy. We're talking about corporate media being run by forces such as corporations, that they have a vested interest in their candidate being elected so they can pass laws that benefit them. And and so my question for you is like, would you use the same scrutiny against Hillary or Obama or anybody, for even from a third party, if they were corrupt and misleading and doing these things that Trump is doing? Because what happens is that we hear a lot of, pro-Trump or anti-Trump. Like, what we want is, we want people who are gonna be fair, and no matter who it is. And this is where the challenge comes: is that even having the first Black president, there was a lot of problems with him. Having someone like Joe Biden take over, he's still in part of the same type of culture that brought about Donald Trump. So what is the solution? So we can focus on all the discrepancies and issues with the current president, but what do you see as a way out of this type of environment that we're in?
Well, I will grant you this: there much has to be changed, and getting rid of Trump is the beginning. It's not the end. Am I 100% delighted with the DNC? No, I'm not. And yes, I do not like the Rupert Murdochs of the world, who buy up news corporations and then try to bend them to their will, or news reportage, stations and newspapers and things. The grand arachnid of Murdoch is a poisonous influence. As far as corporations, having agendas and so on, I will grant you that's a problem too. But again, I'm being very specific here. I'm naming names. I'm talking about CNN. I'm talking about, to a lesser extent, perhaps the cable networks such as MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, some of the independents, Huffington Post, Palmer Report, which is uniquely biased to the left, which kind of gives a balance to everything. But I do believe that the first thing we can't really make any progress with Donald Trump in office. Once he's gone, we've got that's when we have our work cut out for us. We've got an extinction level event. We're in the midst of an extinction level event right now called global warming, which ultimately could spell the end of the human race. If it's permitted to go to its logical conclusion, which will be devastating to the planet. I think a lot of people are just in denial about how bad the situation with global warming is, and it's been an absolute catastrophe to have Donald Trump in office for 4 years, because that means 4 years of virtual inactivity as far as the official attitude of the United States government. A lot of regulations and so on rolled back, but I know it's popular to concede that, well, they're all bad. They all have their corruptions. They all have their secret agendas and so on. I'm sorry, I just don't see any connection in reality between the horror that is Donald Trump and the admitted mediocrity of what we're used to. The admitted mediocrity is starting to look very, very good by comparison. And of course, that's a danger that we can slip into as well, is that we can, breathe a sigh of relief after Donald Trump is gone and just say, okay, well, back to normal and everything is fine. And the answer is no, it's not fine. And it will not be fine until certain changes happen. Systemic racism is a big example of that. Global warming is already mentioned. And of course, universal health care. All of those things are needed to be addressed. I mean, you have no idea, and even Brits don't have any idea, less as well as Americans, what it's like to be able to go to the doctor and leave your credit cards and checkbook behind and not even think about them. And when you're leaving, it never even have to occur to you that you have to stop at the desk and pay. Free medical in this country is just, that's how it should be for every civilized country. And it's one of the great disgraces of America that poverty is effectively illegal, and the penalty is death. The ultimate penalty is death, because if you can't afford health insurance and you're in a critical situation where you need desperate medical coverage, and if you can't afford it, if you're not covered, you will die, and they will let you die. And that's for the richest country in the world. There's no excuse for that. That's another problem that I believe that needs to be addressed. And Joe Biden, I mean, what can I say? The man is 77, 78 years old. That's what we're left with. We're going to have to make the best that we can with what we have. But it's a starting point. It may seem like a feeble starting point, but it is a starting point. But like I said, we won't make any progress with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a psychopath. Donald Trump is a man who's in it for himself. I mean, we just passed a milestone of 150,000 dead Americans due to coronavirus, and Trump is whining about his ratings. I mean, my God. This is like something out of Dr. Strangelove. It's just beyond belief. Because recently I was excoriated by a reader. In fact, I was told that I had stolen a headline. And when I pointed out to the reader that I didn't write the headline, the headline was written for me. Now I submit to Bill articles with headlines that I suggest, and he, once in a blue moon, he'll actually use them, but that's the exception, not the rule. As far as the category of my pieces are concerned, I have no control over that either. And we used to have a category that was either opinion or editorial, I forget which Bill did away with for whatever reason. I guess the subtle distinction was no longer important to him. I write as I feel, generally, and I get a lot of positive feedback in the comment fields as a result of it, because what I'm doing, I think, is cathartic for our readers at times. I try to keep my stuff informal and chatty. I'm not afraid of the personal pronoun I, as I'm sure you're aware of, which has sparked some complaints as well. I mean, you can't open your mouth in the world these days and not have somebody telling you on the sidelines why you're doing it wrong. But I think I provide a service for a lot of people. A lot of people tell me they look forward to my articles, and they read them. I probably inspire more controversy than any other writer on Palmer Report for whatever reason. And I think, well, maybe not for whatever reason, maybe very specifically for the reason that I make them very personal. And when you introduce yourself as a person, people like to take shots at you. And I make I don't try to dissemble my feelings. I don't try to pretend that I'm someone I'm not. If I have a specific attitude towards people, I let it be known, and I hit them between the eyes with it sometimes. Do I hate Donald Trump? You bet I do, and I make no bones about that. I think it's our duty to be intolerant of intolerance. The one philosophical area that's open to us is that we must not tolerate intolerance. Now I know On the surface, to some people, that might seem like a philosophical contradiction in terms, but I assure you it's not. And smarter men than me, Karl Popper specifically, the philosopher, says that that is indeed the way that we must go, is that without intolerance of intolerance, then tolerance itself is doomed. We cannot sit by idly and permit these kinds of outrages against people of color to continue to go on. Black Lives Matter is not a repudiation of white people. It's a cry for help. It's a statement that we have a problem, a systemic problem that needs to be solved. And until that is solved, the white knee is going to remain on the neck of the person of color for all eternity. So we have to address that, and we have to address that, and we have to stop with the niceties. We have to be brutal with ourselves and with the people who continue to perpetuate systems that make such outrages against people of color possible.
What I've heard from my conservative friends, I have religious friends who are conservative and secular friends who are conservative. They say that people voted for Trump for all kinds of reasons. And even Jon Stewart, who is one of the biggest enemies of Trump, was saying that some people voted for Trump as a disruptor, that they were tired of the same old status quo. And so now this idea that if you're a Trump supporter, you must be in line with racists, it's offensive for people who are giving Trump the opportunity to disrupt. And I'm like, but they don't understand that how much disruption is allowed. And as you said in one of your posts, it's not about him being a Republican. It's not about him using right-wing tactics. It's about the disdain of this country that he has, because only someone who could care less about the country would allow it to get into the social upheaval, the amount of people who are dying from the virus. The complete carelessness is the problem. It's not that because they say, oh, well, you're anti-Trump. It's not about being anti or pro. It's about seeing the reality and calling it out for what it is. So is that how you see yourself, as someone who's instead of niceties and saying, oh, well, he's misguided or he has the wrong information, you're ready to just go for it and say, this person is performing the way that someone who doesn't care or has a destructive approach is. So how else can you call it other than?
I think there was a time when it was possible to be a Trump supporter and not be a racist, but I think that time has passed. Yes, I do. I think the lines have been drawn very clearly in the sand. Now, it's, I think as white people, we need to face up to the fact that there is so much endemic racism in our culture that we need to take inventory. We need to take a pretty grim inventory into who we are as a culture and reassess our complicitness in the racism that's endemic today. Because racism isn't simply reserved for the white hoods and the pointy little hats and the cross burners and the Confederate flag wavers. There is a lot of racism light going on right now that needs to be eradicated. A lot of the patronizing, well, I couldn't be a racist because my brother-in-law is a person of color, the kind of tokenism. A lot of that needs to be done away with. And I think to suggest that we have all arrived and we're just waiting for everybody to catch up with us is a mistake. And the people that we need to put in charge of what constitutes racism is not more white people particularly not more old white men. We need to see people of color to step to the fore, and we need to learn from them. We need to listen to them, and we need to be guided by them, because they are the ones who have been there. I'm a big believer in listening to the experts, and right now the experts in racism aren't white sociologists sitting in ivory tower. They're people on the ground. They're people of color who've had to deal with endemic racism on a daily basis. And as yourself, David, I would put you more in the category of a person who is would have a bit of firsthand experience with what I'm talking about. Do you not? I mean, you were born in Mexico. You have a Hispanic last name. I imagine you're much better qualified than I am to converse, personally about what it's like to live in a world of systemic racism. Are you not? Does that not make sense to you?
It makes sense, but there's more layers, because in Mexico we have a caste system that is way more apparent than here in the U.S. And I believe there is a caste system in the U.S. and almost like an apartheid style of access to resources. It's not as blatant and militaristic as it was in South Africa or in Germany during Nazi times, but it is the sense of I don't like to talk about white privilege because it sounds kind of like every term has been overused. So, but I like to talk about the ongoing availability of resources. So just like when you think about people not being able to get to buy a house or to have access to certain jobs or certain schools, people say, oh, well, they just haven't worked hard enough to get there. And it's like, well, if you have money that you have been able to accumulate throughout hundreds of years, you have a step up over other people who were constantly oppressed. And what people don't realize is that they were lynching people in Houston in the 1960s, and that was okay. And they act like, oh, whatever, that already happened, no big deal. And they wouldn't allow Jews and African Americans to own land in the rich neighborhood of Houston. And this is a very progressive town, but that affects their descendants. So to say, oh, whatever, just get over it, move on, it's very misguided.
The fact that, and not to use too draconian an example, but just like there isn't in law, there isn't remedies for just one kind of murder. You kill somebody, you're a murderer, period. We have manslaughter, we have second-degree murder, we have first-degree murder. There are degrees. And perhaps in racism, there are degrees as well. And I don't want to get too far back into Godwin's law, but it's such a handy example to use. I'm going to use it one more time. The question, we're all Hitler supporters, anti-Semites. The answer, believe it or not, is not necessarily a flat yes. But I would say there's an existential answer to that question. And the existential answer to the question is yes. Because what you're effectively doing when you support Hitler is you're supporting anti-Semitism. So when you support Trump, whether you're a bigot or not, and I frankly find it very difficult to believe that you are not a bigot if you support Trump. But let's say for the sake of argument that you support Trump, and somehow you've escaped to also being a bigot. You're still an existential bigot because you're supporting a system that supports the bigotry. So whether you intend it or not, and then we get to the question of, is ignorance of the law an excuse? Well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. I'm not prepared to split hairs that fine. I will tell you this. I'm not overly worried. I'm not all broken up about the personal feelings of Trump supporters because of the evil that that man has done and the deaths that he has caused. I'm not all that worried if I've offended a few Trump supporters who say, well, gee, I'm a Trump supporter and I'm a good person. Well, I submit, ma'am or sir, that you take a good long look at what your definition of a good person is and what kind of man Donald Trump is. So, yeah, there are degrees of racism. I will grant you that, and I think I would be irrational not to acknowledge that. There's a big difference between, you know, the pointy hats and the systemic kind of racist light, where people say, well, gee, yeah, I happen to think all lives matter, and I happen to think that you know the spiel, you know where it goes from there.
So I have a lot
Please.
of friends who are Latino, and there's even a young lady I know who's from the Philippines, and they all love Trump. And when he first got elected, I remember listening to Christian radio, and they said, you know, well, he might not be our best pick, but he's gonna get our agenda accomplished. And the same thing I heard from the Latino Trump supporters was that as long as he pushed for conservative judges, that they didn't care about his background, and him having Pence as his second-hand guy or whatever, his right-hand man, that kind of stabilized all the immorality and terrible personality traits of Trump. So people are willing to swallow that pill if they get their agenda. And that's the one thing that a lot of people don't talk about, is that the Republican Party is all about winning. And they're willing to run over everybody in the process. And the Democrats, from what I've seen, they're infighting, they're disorganized, they don't have a clear path. And that's how Trump won. And that wasn't the only reason that Trump won. The reason that Trump won, and I was sharing this with Artie, is because he was about to fail. And he's always been an opportunist. He wasn't a conservative to start off with. He's always been voting for liberal causes that benefit him. He went full right wing because he had these very rich right wing corporations and individuals who gave him the money to have all the ads and have all the publicity to make it through. And now he's paying them back by installing DeVos as the person for education and people like that. So this idea that he is the epitome of conservatism or of you know, evangelical wishes or something like that, he's actually like the worst representative of all different types of Americans. But he's able to be, he walked into becoming the leader of a movement that is anti-government, anti-science, anti-civil rights and things like that. It's all about corporations and privatizing everything, and dismissing environmental laws to get oil rigs in there and stuff like that. So I think that's the thing that we don't see. We hear people talk about him as a person and maybe his horrible policies, but we don't talk about the whole infrastructure under him. And what I've been very disappointed with is that the Democrats in Congress keep supporting his military spending, his renewal of the Patriot Act, his agenda. As much as they say, oh, he's overweight or he's a whiny baby or whatever, they still keep supporting him and trying to work with him. So why is it that like the monster that you talk about, Robert, is created by the people in power? So what can we little people do in a situation like that?
Well, you can vote him out of office for one thing. And I will say this, I'm aware of the very bizarre antecedents of organized religion, particularly the evangelical movement. And if you follow the work at all of Frank Schaeffer, do you know who he is? He characterizes himself as his father's nepotistic sidekick back in the 70s, his father, Francis Schaeffer, started the pro-life movement and married the pro-life movement to right-wing Republican politics. And that movement going forward has become one of the paradoxically most anti-Christian movements of all. I mean, when you think about the, and of course, the first rule for becoming a Christian is to never read the Bible. Now, I've read the Bible, and I know that it's full of anachronistic, or not anachronistic, it's full of antithetical pronouncements that are completely fly in the face of the evangelical movement. But they've sold all of that out for a single issue, which is pro-life. And they've married themselves to the Republican Party, which is the party of the elite, the party of the 1%, the party of the rich person, the party of the white person. And so they are willing to make all manner of concessions in the name of that. They've effectively become one issue voters and one issue ideologues. And they have, as I say, they've completely and inexorably married themselves to the Republican Party. So when you've so thoroughly sold out to an organization, not because you've thought your way there, but because you've been told by the religious leaders who obviously are in it for the money, right? I mean, they fly around in their private jets, and it's a very, very sick system that's being perpetuated on the Republican side. But that's the part that the religious right plays. Now, not all Republicans are members of the religious right, but enough of them are to make it a powerhouse and very, very difficult to defeat. That if they can do that, if they can, continue to appeal to the religious right and continue to find clever and devious ways of suppressing the vote, because that's the only way to stay in power. The Republicans are not now, nor have they really ever been, the party of the majority. They're the party of dirty tricks. And that's how they employ these dirty tricks to fool people and to stay in power. You've probably heard the expression or the idea that the trees voted for the axe because he was made of wood. That's it. That's effectively what they're doing. Is that they're voting against their own best interest. Because the trees think that because he's made of wood, that he's just like them, but in fact, he's there to chop them down. Donald Trump would have nothing to do with most, on a personal level, with most of the people, the people of color, the people from Mexico, the people that you know, or that Artie knows, who are Trump supporters. Donald Trump, on a personal level, wouldn't even let him into Mar-a-Lago. I mean, these people are scum to him. These people are just being used by this rapist. By the way, on the topic of rape, and if I may, just a quick
we're
side.
Talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Is that where you're going with this?
I could go there, but first, let's talk about E. Jean Carroll. Now, she is a person who said, "Give me some of your DNA, Mr. Trump, Mr. President." If he did, and if a woman accused me of rape, and I knew I was innocent, which I would be because I'd never do such a thing to a woman, I would, knock everybody out of the way to get down to where I had to go to make sure that my DNA was in their hands, because I'd know that would exonerate me. That would be my first priority of business. What does Trump do? He's taking her to court to prevent her from getting a sample of his DNA. Now that's a confession of rape as far as I'm concerned. That to me is evidence sufficient to convict. That's not just beyond a reasonable doubt, that's beyond a shadow of a doubt. A man like Donald Trump refusing to give evidence that will exonerate him in a political year, that he could go around crowing about this woman. You see how the Democrats are? They're accusing me of rape. I just proved that I didn't do it. No, he's taking her to court so that he doesn't have to give her DNA. But you say Jeffrey Epstein. What do you want to talk about him? I'm happy to talk about him. By the way,
I just don't understand how people can say, well, Trump was friends with him, and the Prince of whatever England was, and like, what about the Clintons? Like, and then each side, it's like the Clintons were friends with Epstein, and then the other side, Trump was friends with him, and it's like, can you see that both of them were friends? And the same thing is with the
yes,
and
yes.
Trump was friends with Hillary until the election. So why can't we see that you say, don't say that they're both corrupt? They are both corrupt, but like you're trying to find
let's make
one nice guy in the midst of the corruption.
You make a very good point. Let me tell you about Bill Clinton. I don't like Bill Clinton. I believe Bill Clinton is also a rapist, and I also think he's a scum dog. And by the way, it doesn't matter that we're politically aligned. He and I, we're and by the way, he's not nearly as politically aligned with me as you might think, but he's more politically aligned with me than Donald Trump is. I can tell you that. But I'm a moral human being before I'm political. My morality comes first, and I see Bill Clinton as a bad guy. I don't see him as a good guy at all. So yeah, he hung out with Jeffrey Epstein. No big surprise there. Now you say that Trump and Hillary were friends. No, I don't agree with that. I don't think they were friends at all. I think Trump admired Hillary. I don't think she knew him. I know of no evidence to suggest. Now I may be wrong about this, but I know of no evidence to suggest that.
As far as I know, their daughters were friends in college or whatever. So
yeah, but that doesn't make their parents friends. I mean, I had friends in college and my parents weren't friends with their parents. So, you know, I don't know what that means, but or what inference you can draw from it. Even you know, they may have gone bowling every Saturday night, as far as I know, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Yeah, I believe me, I understand that it's not as neat and tidy as everyone would like it to be, but nothing is. That's the nature of life. There's a lot of slop over. But you know something, when you look at somebody who's got friends in prison, friends who are pedophiles, friends who have been indicted, and you compare them with Obama, you know, 0 indictments, 0 imprisoning, 0 impeachments, you know, I mean, and then you try to make draw some kind of common bond here. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say, yeah, they're in the same field, but they're not of the same field. These are 2 different kinds of characters. And by the way, just because Hillary Clinton was married to Bill Clinton doesn't make her Bill Clinton either. I see Hillary Clinton as a much better person and a much more qualified person to be president of the United States than her husband was. In fact, I think she was arguably one of history's most qualified people. I mean, look at how, what did she spend, 24 years in the White House? I mean, First Lady, Secretary of State, you know, she spent a long time in the federal government, and she had a lot of qualifications to be president of the United States. She was much more qualified than any of the other candidates.
I listen to independent media, and even some independent media outlets are not willing to go there. That a lot of the Russia gating and red baiting stuff that was being pushed in the last couple of years is conjecture. Is based on you know, he met with some Russians, and then there's some Russian guy, and then he was friends with Russian mobsters when he needed money, and then they're trying to make him a Manchurian candidate coming from the Russians to try to take down America, and then there's the issue with the internet, and they went in and took out emails that were against Bernie and this and that. So it hasn't been fully developed, and it's funny that you said that Trump went against the intelligence community, the same intelligence community who weren't able to establish that there was a Russiagate. So how is it that we're still talking about something that is nebulous?
Well, first of all, I need to know what you mean by Russiagate. For one thing, the intelligence community across the board, all 17 of them, confirmed that Russia interfered efficaciously interfered with the 2016 election. If that's what you mean by Russiagate, or what Donald Trump refers to as Russia, yeah, they did. They did, in fact, and they're doing it again for 2020. It is a policy of Vladimir Putin's government to interfere with Americans' elections with an aim to disrupt, just like they interfered in Britain's government when they interfered with the Brexit vote. Now, Brexit came out the way Vladimir Putin wanted. The 2016 election came out the way Vladimir Putin wanted. He usually gets what he wants when he interferes with elections historically. 2014 was a wash. He wanted to have Scotland leave the United Kingdom, and that vote went down the other way, but he employed his troll farms to try to poison that election too. So yeah, the 17 major intelligence communities in the United States all agree that Russia interfered with the election, but because Vladimir Putin says that was good enough for Trump. Now, I don't know how deep the slime goes between Trump and Putin and the Russians. I don't know of anyone who knows definitively how deep that goes either. But you have to ask yourself the question, whose side is he on when he announces in Helsinki that, Vladimir Putin says, I don't care what my intelligence community says. Vladimir Putin says it's not true, and that's good enough for me. I see it as them following the intelligence and it leading to Trump, because when a foreign power uses troll farms and social media and other means to interfere with an American election, it isn't an option to get involved. It's the duty of every intelligence agency available for whom foreign interference is a remit, to get involved and investigate it. And if that investigation leads to a political candidate, then we want to know about that too. And we know that they were prepared to cooperate with the Russians. They were delighted at the idea of the Trump Tower meeting. Trump asked Russia, if you're listening and you can find the 33,000 emails, you remember that statement. He actually asked the cameras. He asked China to investigate Hunter Biden. He asked Ukraine to investigate, to announce an investigation. He didn't care about an actual investigation. He just wanted them to announce it so he could use it. This is the President of the United States using foreign countries for his own political gain. Yeah, it's the duty of our and your intelligence community to investigate that. When the President of the United States is committing treason out in the open. Yeah, absolutely. I'm outraged by it. I'm totally outraged by it. And I think you should be too, if you think about it. The evidence I'm looking at is Trump Tower meeting and 10 instances in the Mueller report of obstruction of justice, and Donald Trump siding siding with Putin virtually every single time it comes down to a contest between Putin and his own intelligence people, repudiating the FBI, repudiating the CIA in favor of his buddy Vladimir Putin. Now, I don't know about you, but I smell a rat when I see stuff like that
Why did
happen,
they
and it
drop
bothers me.
the investigation? Why didn't they go further? Why did it just?
Because Bill Barr put an end to it. That's why. As a matter of fact, Mueller wasn't. Who, by the way, I'm not a big fan of Robert Mueller either. I thought his flaccid interview with Congress, his kind of laissez-faire, well, it's nothing to do with me kind of thing. He saw the sleaze that was going on in the President of the United States, and he should have been outraged. If he was an American, he should have been more than just your ivory tower kind of dusty, dry academic when it came to that. And I wrote an article about it, which was very unpopular at the time, but has become more popular since, stating in no uncertain terms that I feel like we were let down by Robert Mueller, because he could have stated what he found in more intense and angry terms, and instead he was very timid about everything, and to an extent that I think actually hurt the point of his entire probe. But Bill Barr put an end to it anyway. He put a premature end to it. So we'll never know how far he could have gone with it, because he had to make a hasty conclusion, because as soon as Bill Barr got involved, he saw to it that the Mueller investigation was going to be over in a hell of a hurry.
But as we close up, how can we trust the current Democratic leaders when they keep on voting for the Patriot Act, for military spending, to keep the wars going? How can we suddenly be like, okay, well, we're going to vote for their guy and we're going to trust that they're going to make the right decisions when they've been enabling Donald Trump to do a lot of the stuff that you have promised?
I don't know if you can trust them. I do know that you can't trust Donald Trump. In fact, let me put it a little more strongly. You can trust Donald Trump to do the wrong thing every time. Like Adam Schiff says, you can trust that this man will only ever act in his own best interest and never in the best interest of the United States of America. So what we're faced with is not a well, gee, the best of both candidates, who do I choose from? We have to flee for our lives from this man. He is not merely a threat to the existence of the United States of America. He's a threat to the world. We cannot let a man, a psychopath like Donald Trump, continue to have the nuclear codes and to continue to oversee the necessary work that needs to be done in order to, if we can even save the planet from global warming. There are a million, as I say at the conclusion of a lot of my articles, there are a million of reasons why Donald Trump is unfit to be president of the United States. This has just been a few of them. If I may, just a brief commercial. That's my website, fourthrightleft.com. That's fourthrightleft.com, no hyphens. And you can follow me on Twitter at R.A. Harrington. That's at R.A. Harrington. Either one, Forthright Left or at R.A. Harrington.
Thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see you next week with another episode of the Mystic-Skeptic.
Thanks, David.